Hello, my name is Ian Derbyshire. I'm a botanist at the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew in the UK, and I'm presenting today on our work on identifying important plant areas in Mozambique as part of the Tropical Important Plant Areas programme. This work is a collaboration between Kew, the Agricultural Research Institute of Mozambique, and Eduardo Mondlane University in Maputo, and with a Mozambican PhD scholarship at the University of Kent in the UK. Mozambique is a vast country of nearly 800,000 kilometres squared, with approximately 2,500 kilometres of Indian Ocean coastline alone, and supports rich and varied landscapes and habitats from wet montane forests and inselbergs through to dry coastal sand forests and thickets on raised corals. These in turn support a wealth of biodiversity, as well as critical ecosystem services on which local communities rely for their well-being. But as with many countries in the tropics, the biodiversity of Mozambique is increasingly under threat from a range of factors, including rapid population growth and resultant expansion of slash-and-burn agriculture, excessive wood harvesting for trade, construction and charcoal production, industrial expansion and the spread of invasive species. And Mozambique's natural resources are being depleted at an alarming rate. In light of these imminent threats, it is essential that the limited resources for conservation effectively target critical areas for protecting biodiversity. Although crucial to the survival of wider diversity, plants are often severely underrepresented in such prioritisation schemes, not because the knowledge does not exist, but because in many countries the data on plant diversity aren't available in formats that are accessible and understandable to decision makers and practitioners. The Important Plant Areas programme, first established by Plant Life International in the 1990s, was designed to address these issues and to provide a pragmatic yet rigorous means of identifying critical sites for plant diversity globally. Good progress has been made to date on identifying IPAs in Europe and North Africa, amongst other regions, as highlighted in dark green on this map, but very little progress has been made in the tropics, which is why the Tropical Important Plant Areas programme was launched in 2015, coordinated by Kew in collaboration with our global partnerships. In the initial phase of this work, 7 countries or regions were selected, highlighted here in brown, with Mozambique selected as a priority because of the urgent need to understand and protect its plant diversity. The IPA criteria were originally designed primarily from a European perspective. And so through a global consultation, together with Plant Life International, the IPA criteria were modified in this 2017 paper, so that they better reflect the challenges facing plant diversity studies and conservation issues globally. IPAs provide an important contribution to the global strategy for plant conservation under its 2020 targets, specifically under Target 5, which aims to protect and effectively manage at least 75% of the most important areas of plants globally. For a site to qualify as an IPA, it has to meet one or more of 3 criteria: the presence of threatened species, threatened habitats and exceptional botanical richness. This slide gives an overview of the range of activities required for assessing a national IPA network, ranging from collation and mapping of existing data on species and habitats to targeted field surveys and to extinction risk assessments. These are all tasks that many botanists and botanical institutions such as herbaria and botanical gardens are well experienced in, and so we're well placed to lead on this work. It should also be noted that such work is largely impossible without a solid taxonomic framework. In Mozambique, we are fortunate to have a near-complete flora, that being Flora zambesiaca, and a range of other useful publications on the country's plant diversity, which form a solid basis for identifying priority species and habitats. Whilst the large majority of data that are used to identify IPAs already exist in herbarium collections, literature, online databases, and the knowledge of in-country experts, a field component is also essential to assess the current status of species and habitats and the threats at candidate IPA sites, as well as to fill in gaps in our knowledge of areas of potentially high botanical interest. Our work in Mozambique draws on well over a decade of collaborative fieldwork at sites across the country, specifically targeting areas that are likely to trigger IPA status. Such fieldwork has also provided at least a brief initial opportunity to meet with local communities and to promote the importance of valuing and carefully managing the biodiversity over which they have stewardship. The work has drawn extensively on the expert knowledge of botanists, ecologists and conservation practitioners both within Mozambique and internationally. And in turn, the project has enabled the building of capacity in Mozambique in a range of skills for the study of biodiversity and species and site-based conservation assessments, including botanical survey, red listing and IPA assessment. This should provide a legacy beyond the current work and should allow future reassessments of the IPA network as knowledge and circumstances change at existing and newly identified IPA sites. As part of this process, we've run a series of workshops to build and utilise this expertise, some of which are pictured here. In terms of data, we have focused our efforts on the endemic and near-endemic range-restricted flora of Mozambique, which, at well over 600 species, comprises just under 10% of the total flora. We've collated over 12,500 records of these species, with their distribution mapped here on the right. Whilst we acknowledge that there are still significant gaps in our knowledge of the distribution of the flora, when we look at how these data translate to the richness of endemic species, we see clear concentrations emerging, and it is within these concentrated areas that we're focusing the identification of IPAs based upon criterion B, that of botanical richness. We have brought together the sum of our knowledge on the data of the endemic flora for the first time in this publication in phytokeys. This work has also highlighted that there is still much to discover in Mozambique's plant diversity, with over 100 undescribed species noted. And Mozambique continues to be amongst the countries with the highest rates of new species description in tropical Africa. We have also developed a red list of globally threatened plant species for Mozambique using the IUCN standard, and over 450 species have been assessed, nearly 70% of the endemic or near-endemic flora, of which over half are threatened with extinction and a further 10% are data deficient. It's just worth noting that the discrepancy in figures for the numbers of threatened species between the pie chart below and those that are actually published on the red list in the table above is because we have a significant number of assessed species currently in the publication pipeline. But in the map on the right, we can again see clear concentrations in the distribution and richness of these threatened species that enable us to identify IPAs under criterion A, that of threatened species. As examples, this area up in the northeast of the country in the coastal lowlands is particularly rich in threatened species, as is the area of mountains along the Zimbabwe border here in Manica province. But you can also see concentrations along a second mountain range here running through northern Mozambique. And finally, there are concentrations of threatened species running along the coastal lowlands in southern Mozambique as well. Through application of these datasets, as well as an initial assessment of the threatened habitats of the country, we've identified 57 IPAs across Mozambique, all of which qualify under criterion A, i.e. the presence of threatened species, with 13 sites also qualifying under criterion B, being exceptionally botanically rich, and 25 sites under criterion C, containing threatened habitats. These sites constitute less than 3% of the total land area of Mozambique, yet they support populations of approximately 85% of the threatened species. This demonstrates that through using the IPA network as a guide, significant conservation gains could be made by concentrating efforts within a relatively small area. Crucially though, fewer than half of the IPA sites identified have any form of formal protection for biodiversity at present, and a number of the sites that are protected on paper are not effectively managed for their plant diversity. Hence, there is now a large task ahead to promote the conservation and sustainable management of Mozambique's plant resources, using this IPA network as a means of enabling effective prioritisation. By comparing the IPA network in the map on the left to the distribution of globally threatened plant species in the centre and the location of proposed centres of plant endemism in Mozambique on the right, you can see that there are strong correlations evident. Both IPA sites and the threatened species they support are largely concentrated within these centres of endemism. Notably, the two coastal regions of the Rovuma centre of endemism here in the north, corresponding to quite a number of IPA sites, and the Greater Maputoland region in the south, which is here subdivided into three local centres of Inhambane, Maputoland in the strict sense, and the Lobombo Mountains, again corresponding to quite a number of IPA sites in the south of Mozambique. And also the two montane centres of endemism in Mozambique, the Chimanimani and Nyanga along the Zimbabwe border, and the Malangi Namuli Rubawe Centre in northern Mozambique extending into Malawi, again corresponding to a number of montane sites in the IPA network. The only other region of the country to support a concentration of sites and species that are threatened is around the Cheringoma Plateau and adjacent rift system here in Sofala province in central Mozambique and corresponding to these sites in the IPA network. And interestingly, this may lend support towards recognition of a further local centre of endemism in that region in the future. Moving forward, our focus will shift from identifying to using the IPA network. Throughout the project, we have taken opportunities to promote this work to wider stakeholders, as seen in some of the examples in the slide here, and have engaged with government agencies and conservation practitioners to ensure that IPAs are recognised as priority sites for natural resource planning. Of course, much further work is needed to translate the IPA network into conservation action, not least an assessment of what form of conservation management may be most appropriate at and within each site. Given that Mozambique has already committed nearly 30% of its land area to varying designations of formally protected areas, it will be challenging to secure traditional protected area status for additional sites, and we need to be open-minded about what conservation measures might be most successful. Formal or informal community conservation areas may be particularly desirable for some IPAs, given the strong links between rural communities and the natural environment. Such schemes are already under development at Mount Marbu and in the Rubawe Massif, two of our critical IPA sites. The identification of IPAs is therefore just the beginning of this process, but this work represents a major step forward in our understanding of Mozambique's rich biodiversity and will provide an important platform for our conservation work moving forward. So I would like to end by thanking my co-authors and a wide range of collaborators and contributors to this work. And in particular, I'd like to thank Oppenheimer Generations and Stephen and Maggie Lansdowne for their generous support, which has made this work possible. Thanks for listening, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have on the Tropical Important Plant Areas programme in Mozambique and beyond.